There we go. I've just got the recording turned on. Okay, so we have a finite amount of time, so it's 7 o'clock now. Just maybe give it another minute or so, and then we'll see what's happening. I'm seeing other people still in the weight room. I don't know how to shut off the weight room. But I'll just keep an eye on it and just keep approving people as they pop up. That's great. So as people start coming in, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm Howard Sandler. You can I have a website, howardsandler.com. That's more for commercial photography, portraits, and so on. Most of which is digital photography. But I have links on that site to all of my other online presences, which some of which are for film. I'm on Flickr as H Sandler, and that's almost all film photography that I put on Flickr. And that's probably the best one if you want to see my work. And people are welcome to correspond with me. It's howard@howardsandler.com. I was just saying before we started that I think I'll post some comments after the meetup, and I'll put a bunch of links that I'm going to discuss in the talk tonight, so you don't have to scribble them all down. Okay, let me just change the view so I'm not looking at myself all the time. There we go. Everyone else has their video turned off, but that's okay. At least I'm smaller now. So. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about tonight is adventures in film photography with vintage cameras, and following the outline that was posted. So why would you do this? So how is film any different? So film is different from digital photography in a few ways. The look is somewhat different, although I think that is somewhat overhyped, that there's a film look. There's a lot of film looks. There's also a lot of digital looks, and you can generally make a digital image look like it came from film and vice versa. However, it's always easier to, if you like the look that you traditionally get from film, you'll of course get it if you start with film. Now, in particular, where film really excels, and I'm talking about negative film. I'll talk about the kinds of film later, but most film is negative. You shoot black and white negative film. The bright things look dark on the negative, and the dark shadows look clear on the negative. And then you have to reverse that to make a print or a digital image. Color negative film is similar, except you get complementary colors. So things that were red look kind of green blue on the negative, and green blue things look orange on the negative. So negative film has a property that it's very, very hard to blow the highlights. It's very, very hard to overexpose negative film. And so it does have a different look in the highlights. If you look carefully, they just roll off. You get less and less contrast, but you never really get pure white unless you deliberately do something in post-processing. Whereas digital, when you overexpose the highlights, you get pure white, and the transition from the very lightest grays to the white is very abrupt. And that is one difference to look for between how film and digital looks. The other is grain. Some people look on the grainy look of film as a negative, and as a negative feature, I mean, not as a negative, but others like that look. You can mimic that look with digital. There's some kind of add grain filter in programs like Photoshop or other programs, but you'll get natural grain with film photography, and some people like that. Others, like me, generally want to minimize grain. but nevertheless, it's there and it's real, and you can manipulate it chemically, which is kind of interesting, and it's a very hands-on thing. The other difference between film and digital is film can be much higher resolution than most affordable digital cameras. And I say can be advisedly. So most of us, if we're starting with film photography, we're going to use a 35 millimeter camera. So this uses standard 35 millimeter film, which is an image that's 36 by 24 millimeters in size. It's very hard to get higher resolution than a good digital camera with that. You need a really, really good techniques for scanning or printing with a really good enlarger. However, if you go up in size with film cameras, you can have larger image areas. You can have medium format, which is usually 60 by 60 millimeters. And that'll have resolutions of at least 25 megapixels when you scan it, even with a very cheap scanner. And if you go up to sheet film, and I'll show you a sheet film camera later on, you'll exceed anything any digital camera can do. You'll get 100, 200, 300 megapixels easily without even using sophisticated equipment. So you can get higher resolution with film. But a lot of the reason to shoot film cameras is not so much the technicalities of how the film looks and how the resulting image is going to be. It's the intangibles. It's the feel of the process and the feel of what you're doing. So the main thing is when you shoot film, you get something tangible and physical that you can look at, and you can see it's an image just with your naked eye. No mathematical processing. It's not transient. It doesn't disappear when you shut off your computer. You get a physical piece of film out of the camera, and later you can get a physical print. And that's it's hard to describe, but it gives you a certain satisfaction to have physically produced an image. The other thing which a lot of people talk about is how it slows you down, and it will slow you down. I mean, you're not going to burn through more than 1 or 2 rolls of film. So 36, 72 images probably at the most in a session. And very often when I go out to shoot film, I might take 2 or 3 shots. And whereas with digital, I might take 100 just to judge the exposure and decide where I'm going to take the picture from, and then throw 97 of them away. So the film process is not spray and pray. It's very much a deliberate, if we want to use the sort of contemporary word in the art world, it's a contemplative process. You really want to plan what you're going to shoot, how you're going to shoot it, think about the exposure and the focus, what's in the background before you press the shutter. Because every time you press the shutter, it's something like $1 or $2, or with sheet film, it's more like $7. The other thing, and for me, this is really the big one, is you get to handle really cool cameras. I mean, the cameras they built in the 1940s and 50s are all metal, all chrome, real leather, beautiful fit and finish. Later in the other talk today, Eden is going to talk about some of the vintage lenses and the unique looks they have. But here I'm just talking about purely the aesthetics and the mechanics of the equipment. They're just gorgeous. And the equipment that would have been astronomically priced in its time is very affordable today. Sometimes, you can find things at garage sales and flea markets, which might have been the equivalent of a couple $1,000s in their time, 50, 60 years ago. Also, the variety of film cameras is very different. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Very, very different form factors depending on the size of the negative and the technology. So for me, the feel and the process are a big part of it, not as much. I mean, the resulting image has to be good, But I wouldn't say that in most cases it's really a lot different from what I could have done with the digital camera. It's just that I enjoy the process a lot more. Sometimes when I'm in a cynical mood, I say also your pictures don't have to be as good when you're a film photographer, because you go on forums like Flickr and there's a little built-in community of other film photographers, and everybody's impressed when a 100-year-old camera produces anything. It doesn't have to be that good. So there's that factor as well. I think I'll talk about the film community a little bit just before I move on to the cameras. So one thing I like is that as a hobby, collecting vintage cameras and shooting vintage cameras appeals to a smaller niche of all the people that like photography in general. It's a tight-knit community. You get to see the same names in different forums, and you get to know what kind of cameras and photography they like. And in general, I will generalize. In general, there are friendlier people in the film community than in the digital photography community. And I say that because my experience in the early years of digital photography, most of us were on DP review forums. And people got so protective about their, Nikon versus Canon, that sort, and no, the megapixels of this is lower, but that's because the pixels on this other technology really are like 2 pixels on another tech. And that you would get into these nerdish sort of technology wars, and people were nasty to each other. And in general, there is some of that in film. There are know-it-alls, but in general, I find people are pretty friendly. That everybody's struggling. Everybody has made the same mistakes, like you've exposed an entire roll and the film was backwards in the camera and you got nothing. And everybody, you post that and say, oh yeah, I did that. Welcome to the club. So it's a very nice collegial atmosphere, and I like that. I'll put in the notes, in the comments, some of the communities that I've been involved in. Facebook has several groups for film photography. Vintage camera collectors is a nice one. Vintage camera users is a nice one. It's obviously one is to show the cameras and the other is to show results. Another one that has quite a large readership, that if I post a photo of a camera there, you'll get 80, 90, 100 responses, is called Old and Rare Camera. I think it's collectors, but Old and Rare Cameras, if you just put that in the search in Facebook, you'll find the group. That's a nice group. And another one is Creative Film Photography. So that's Facebook. In terms of podcasts, it's quite nice to listen to film photography podcasts while you're sitting there scanning film. Scanning film tends to be a sort of tedious process, so it's nice to listen to something. There's one called the Film Photography Project podcast. It comes out of New Jersey. That's a lot of fun. There's one called Sunny 16, which is quite good. And there's a Canadian one from Burlington called Classic Camera Revival. I'll put links to all of those. And finally, Flickr as a photo sharing site has many, many groups devoted to specific cameras, specific films, specific formats of film, old cameras, vintage cameras, just pretty much any specialty you want. There's a Flickr group. You just search in the Flickr search bar and search for groups and you'll find them. I'm the moderator of one called Folding Fanatics, and it's devoted to folding cameras of all types. Okay, so that's about the communities and why shoot film. Let me show you some cameras. If you're going to start, you haven't shot film before, or it's been many years, and you want to get some results soon without too much learning curve, I would suggest you start with 35 millimeter cameras, because the film is easy to find and it's easy to do things with 35 millimeter size film. And there's lots of cameras cheap, which are they're very likely to work without having any quirks or foibles. So I would start with a 35 millimeter single lens reflex. They look like digital cameras, except they have the film winding lever on the top. I happen to like Nikons. Nikons tend to be a little more expensive, but they almost invariably work. The one I'm holding is a metal one from the golden age of metal cameras in the 70s. You can do much, you can get much, even more functionality and pay less if you buy a more recent film Nikon camera. The Nikon F65, the Nikon F80, these typically, the bodies are $35 maybe. You have to put batteries in them, but they work and they have autofocus. And you'll get film out of them, and the film will be correctly exposed because they have very good exposure meters, and they use modern batteries. That's another little tip. 35 millimeter SLRs generally need a battery just for the meter in the older ones that are mechanical. You can either just do without the meter, or if you want to be able to use the meter in the camera and it needs a battery, I suggest trying to get a camera that uses a 1.5 volt or a set of 1.5 volt batteries. Then you can use alkalines or silver oxide. A lot of cameras from up until about 1978 were designed to use mercury button cell 1.35 volts, and they won't give the right readings with a 1.5 volt battery. There are workarounds. You can change the film speed, but it's only sort of a partial compensation. You can buy an adapter that adapts the voltage, but the adapters will cost as much as the camera. So I would suggest just staying away at first, at least, from the cameras that use mercury batteries. That will include most of the Minoltas and many of the Pentax cameras, the early Pentax cameras like the Spotmatics. The later ones, the Pentax the K series and the M series, they're fine. They use alkaline batteries. Pretty much all the Nikons use alkaline or silver oxide batteries. And Olympus, the Olympus OM1, very well-known camera, used a mercury battery, but starting from the OM2 on, they switched to requiring alkalines, which are easy to get. If you can find an Olympus OM2, that's a really nice camera. Has auto exposure options as well. Okay, so 35 millimeter SLRs are nice. They handle a lot like a digital camera, and they look a lot like a digital camera. The other main type of 35 millimeter camera is called a rangefinder. These are even simpler. There's no prism. You're not looking out through the lens. You're looking out through a little window on the front. And the better ones have a what's called a rangefinder, which is a little assembly with a prism and a mirror that moves as you focus the lens. And there'll be a little spot in the middle of the viewfinder, and you'll see a double image, and that image will converge to the main image when you're in focus. So it's a different way to focus. It can be faster to focus, and the cameras tend to be a little smaller and lighter than single lens reflex, and they can cost a little bit less. I got this for $5. The light meter doesn't work, but I don't care. It has manual shutter speeds and manual apertures, so it doesn't matter. And it works fine. There are some very famous brands of rangefinders which cost much, much more than almost anything else. And I would avoid them unless you really are a collector more than, and you want the very best. And that brand is Leica, and the other brand is Contax. They're both made in Germany. The golden age was the 30s and 40s and 50s. And they're still as expensive as they ever were. you're looking at $2,000-3,000 to get started with a Leica and just one or two lenses. And there's no question they're going to give you excellent results, but will they give you results that are $2,000 better than this, especially when you're scanning the negative and showing it on the web? I don't know. But I that's a very deliberate choice if you're going to collect something like Leicas. My own preference and my own expertise is really as a bottom feeder, buying things at yard sales and on Kijiji. So that's 35 millimeter, which was considered a miniature format until the 60s, by the way. The other format, which is different from almost anything you've seen in digital cameras, is what's called medium format. Medium format uses what's called 120 size film. It's not 120 millimeters. It's just called type 120 film. You can still buy it today. I'll talk about where to buy film at the end. And the cameras are bigger and very different. And if you're going to try medium format, you're going to get immediately much, much higher resolution images. Even the cheapest kind of scanner, you're going to get 25, 30 megapixel images. And even with a cheap lens, you're going to get very sharp images with a medium format camera. The type that I would suggest is good to start out with in medium format is something like this. This is called a twin lens reflex. And the way it works is this lens exposes the film, which goes in the back of the camera. And the top lens is just for viewing. It's just an aid for you to compose and focus. It bounces off a mirror. The mirror is at 45. Whoop. It's hard to do this reversed on my. The mirror is at 45 degrees inside here, and you're going to view the picture on that ground glass screen. So sometimes this is called a waist level finder because you're going to hold the camera not really waist level, but more at chest level, and you're going to look down when you're focusing and composing. So twin lens reflexes, they handle very differently. You're holding it down there, you're looking down. Many people who do street photography say that it's less intimidating to the people you're photographing because you're not looking directly at them through a device, you're looking down. They may not even know that you're photographing them. A lot of people come up to me and think this is some kind of a movie camera. Anyways, the images are top notch, and these are not terribly expensive. Again, except for one sort of brand that is considered like Leica, but for medium format, and that's Rollei. So if you get a Rolleiflex, you're looking at $1,000+ I would suggest, unless you seriously really want to collect Rolleis, that I would suggest getting one of the Japanese brand twin lens reflexes. They're often abbreviated TLR. This one is from Ricoh. It's a Ricoh Diacord. All of the major Japanese brands made TLRs in the 50s. So there's the Diacord. There's the Yashica Matte. Lots and lots of those around. Any week on Kijiji, Ottawa, I'll see one or two Yashicas. There's Yashica Matte and Yashica LM. There's a whole bunch of them. There was Minolta made a TLR called the Autocord. I have one of those, and the lens is killer. It's an excellent camera. In fact, my son took it away to Montreal, and sometimes I wish I could get it back from him. But so Minolta TLRs are good. There's another one called Mamiya. Mamiyas are a little bit different because the lenses can be changed. You can put a telephoto or a wide angle on it. So they cost a little bit more as a result of the mechanism for that. And they're a little bigger and heavier as a result. They're also, generally you can get started with a Yashica or a Mamiya for $300, $350 camera, lens, and you're ready to go. And you'll get excellent results. Also, the pictures are square. So, when I started taking square pictures, I thought it's convenient. I never have to rotate the camera to do vertical, horizontal. I'll crop it later when I scan it. But then I started to sort of fill the space, and my compositions changed to suit the square. So if the artistic aspects are important to you, you may find that actually looking at a square image when you're composing will change the kind of photography you do, maybe for the better. It just kind of opens your mind to other possibilities.
Just a quick note, Howard.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just giving you a 5-minute warning here.
Yes, yeah, I still got a lot to go, so thanks. The other type of medium format camera, which is not expensive, is a folding camera. These are almost always German. There are American ones, but I would suggest start with one of the German ones. They tend to be $100 or less. The Zeiss ones are very good. Zeiss Netar, Zeiss Iconta. I think this one cost me about $105, and I bought it in a different city. They give you a great big negative, often 60 by 90 centimeters, and you could keep it in a winter park, a pocket in the winter. There are things to look for when you buy those cameras, though. The bellows could have little holes in them. The shutters could stick. So those, I generally would not buy folding cameras by mail. I really want to see the camera in most cases. And finally, is large format. So this is like a press camera from the 1940s. It's called a Reflex, and if you're going to start, this is called large format. It shoots sheets of film. You load only one sheet at a time in the back, and then you got to change the sheets, turn the holder around between shots. This will give you hundreds of megapixels resolution, but it's a very slow, deliberate process. I'm not going to go on at length on large format tonight, because that's generally, if you want to shoot large format, you know that, and you're already looking at various forums for that kind of thing. What else can I tell you about the cameras before I go on to where to get film? There's no such thing as dialing your camera up to ISO 10,000 on film cameras. Your film is 100 ISO or 400 ISO for the most part. You could push it, but then you're going to get more grainy images. So you generally do want to have a flash. I never pay more than $5, $10 for camera flashes. They're all pretty much the same. I do suggest you get a flash that does have a little cord, because sometimes the cameras don't have a hot shoe for the flash. They have a cold shoe, and you need to plug the flash into a little port called the PC port to get flash. So that's just, don't pay a lot of money for flash. They usually come free when you buy a camera from somebody. So that's about the cameras. Now, where would you buy a camera? Kijiji is good. It's nice because it's local. You can go and look at the camera. I would at least fire the shutter, especially on a slow speed, like 1/30th of a second, and make sure the shutter leaves don't stick if it's a leaf shutter, like a rangefinder camera. SLRs, you can usually hear the shutter and you can tell the difference between slow and fast, and that it'll work. SLRs, make sure the viewfinder doesn't have fungus in it. You have a nice clear image without big brown blotches in the middle. Look at the lenses, hold the lens up to the light with the aperture held open. Make sure you're not seeing a lot of crap and haze through the lens. A little bit of dust is usually not a problem. Even scratches are more of a problem if they're on the back of the lens than if they're on the front of the lens. You have to really scratch a lens up incredibly on the front for it to have a big effect. Okay, where else to buy? So Kijiji is good. For cameras that are not as common, it's worth searching Kijiji and changing your area to Canada-wide. So if I'm looking for Reflex, there aren't going to be more than 5 or 6 for sale everywhere in Canada at any one time. So I'm not going to get a lot of hits if I just restrict myself to Ottawa or even Ontario. So I'll change the search criteria to search for the word Graflex across all of Canada. Facebook Marketplace is increasingly good for camera listings. I'm not too good at searching on that. I just sort of rely, after I've looked for a few cameras by brand name, Facebook has just figured out I'm interested in cameras, and when I go on Marketplace, it just presents me with things. Sometimes they are pleasant surprises. Generally, the sellers on Facebook Marketplace may not be knowledgeable about, they inherited something, and you often have to ask a lot of questions to find out if it's really a camera that's working. The next one, this one I can't emphasize enough, is create an account at photrio.com. It's a forum for photography, and you can designate your interests as analog photography, and you can see classified ads just for film cameras. And the ads on Photrio are invariably, if they say the thing they're selling works, it works. The people are very knowledgeable. You don't get a huge bargain, but on the other hand, you don't get hosed. People sell things for a fair value, and they have a reputation among the other people that they want to maintain, so they don't try to cheat people. I've bought and sold a fair number of things very successfully on photrio.com, Photrio. And finally, there's eBay. I generally, I've never had a really bad experience, but yeah, sometimes things don't work the way the seller said they did. And I don't like to make a case about it because you want to have a good rating. So I wouldn't buy really expensive stuff on eBay unless I knew the seller. I would check the seller's ratings are 99.5% or better, because if they've sold a lot of stuff, they really should have very close to 100% positive feedback. You can get a good idea of the value of things by looking at the sold. You search for the brand or the model you want, and then on the left-hand side of eBay, tick off sold items only, and then you'll see what's been selling the last few months of that item, and then read them. You can see the original listing, and you'll see if it was abnormally cheap, you might find buried in the listing that it said it's for parts or repair. But you know, if you sort of average it, take the median, you'll get a fair idea of what things really should cost on eBay. So that's about where to buy. And I think I'm running out of time. I'll just very quickly say, what do you do when you've shot the film? So I won't talk about scanning too much today, but you don't have to scan. You don't have to get into chemicals. You can buy film in Ottawa at Galaxy, Bank and Catherine. You can buy film by internet from Argentix in Montreal, especially black and white film. You can buy film in more bulk, like 25 rolls at a time, from B&W in New York. The shipping after $100, the shipping is free to Canada, and you can get your film developed and scanned at GPC Labworks, Bank and Somerset, and that'll get you started. And then you can start thinking about doing your own scanning. If it's 35 millimeters, and you have a digital camera with a macro or close-up lens, you can do it yourself by photographing your negative suspended over your phone or some kind of a white light like an iPad. There's a lot of stuff online about how to do that. Or you could buy a scanner. I recommend Epson Scanners. There's one, I think it's the V600. You can usually find them used going for about $100, and that'll do a fine job, especially on medium format. Large format's another story. It's a little bit more complicated. But I think I'll rest at this point, and maybe we have a few minutes for questions, Mike. Or people are welcome to contact me. I'll put my coordinates in comments on the Meetup site. Or you can just post a comment there, and I'll be having a look at them for a while after the Meetup.
Yeah, I think we look forward to getting you to. There's a wealth of information there, a lot of little things like the batteries and that stuff. I'm going, wow. Anyways, I don't know if it shows on your screen. My screen's showing less than a minute left before Zoom times us out. So let me
Okay.
just take that time to say thank you very much. There's so much information there, so many considerations. So for anybody who's staying on for the next little bit, just dial back in, and we're going to start another Zoom with Eden, sorry. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about lenses as opposed to cameras in general. So, but that was wonderful. Lots of expertise there. Thank you very much, everyone, and leave your comments or questions for Howard in the meetup site.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks. So, Mike, we'll probably be kicked off, and it's better if we leave and then rejoin.
It'll just say thank you for using Zoom.
Yeah.